you've got to have a little bit of both of those. You got to have a little bit of the dog in you, and you got to have a little bit of the scientist in you. And if you don't have both, you could be really good with just one. But I don't think anybody's going to be great unless they have both. Was it you do not esteem that which you did not earn? So if you didn't earn the right to use that, do you care? Probably not. But if you had to work your ass off to get to it, it means something.
This week on the Yoakum Strength Podcast, we sit down with legendary longtime coach Dr. Bryan Mann. Coach Mann has been in the strength and conditioning field for decades and is one of the grandfathers of velocity based training. Throughout the episode, he talks about who velocity based training is right for, when to implement it with athletes, and human performance versus quality of life. If you've been curious about VBT training, this is an episode for you. As always, thank you for listening and enjoy the episode.
Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about the Yoakum Strength Insider. The Insider is an online training platform that takes everything we talk about on this podcast, better movement, smarter training, and actually enjoying the process, and turns it into something you can live and breathe. Our goal is simple: create better movers who feel stronger, more capable, and more confident in their bodies. We do that through a holistic approach that includes everything from sprinting and lifting to mobility and spinal movements. Inside the Insider, we run several distinct programs: Building Better Movers for foundational athletic development, a dedicated Olympic lifting program, the Get Yoked series for pushing strength and physique, and Washed Up Movers for lifters who want to keep training hard without beating themselves into the ground. We also offer focused options like a vertical jump program and at-home training, so you're never forced into a one-size-fits-all plan. You're not just getting a program, you're getting full access to our app with video demos, progress tracking, a community Discord, and direct communication with a Yoakum Strength coach, plus our 30-page nutrition and lifestyle guideline covering how we eat, train, and build habits with our athletes. If you want to make training fun again, use code podcast25 at checkout for 25% off your first program. Hope to see you there. Boom. All right, well, Coach, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me, Austin. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, so I am a velocity-based training rookie, and I got really interested into it. I was seeing Will Rattel use an OVR, got an OVR, was like playing around with it. It's just like a VBT device. So
Yeah,
he's playing
absolutely.
around with it, messing around with it, but didn't really know what any of the numbers meant, right? Like I had them, I kind of knew what people were talking about, and just started to do a deep dive into VBT. And the book that kept coming up, man, was yours right here. And you said you'll sign it for me one day, so I'm going to hold you to it. But
Yeah, let's go.
Developing Explosive Athletes, the Use of Velocity-Based Training and Training Athletes by Dr. Bryan Mann. And that is how I first heard of your name, read the entire book, devoured it, went into Will Fleming's book about Olympic lifting, and he based a lot of his stuff off of a lot of your stuff too. It's kind of
Oh,
cool reading
wow.
those books back to back, and he mentioned you a ton in the book. But it was really cool dive into velocity-based training. And one of the cool stories that you mentioned is how you discovered VBT. And I would like to hear that story. How did you get started in the VBT world and what was happening there?
Man, so yeah, this is going way back in the annals, way back into time. I can't, gosh, I could remember the album, but I can't remember. I think it was Blackstreet or somebody started off a song like that. But anyway, I got my start in strength and conditioning for being at the right place at the right time. And there was this guy named Rick Perry who is, I assume he's still at Northwestern. I haven't talked to him in at least a couple of months, and I know there was some different changeover on that staff, but whatever. And but he came from this guy named Fred Roll, who is one of the original icons in strength and conditioning. He wrote a chapter or two in the first edition of the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning. And Fred was a voracious reader and looked at stuff. So then, that he instilled that into Rick. And whenever I started working for Rick, he had all these photocopies of photocopies of photocopies of translated Soviet text. So then I photocopied it and started reading it out by the pool and other things like that on the weekends. Instead of studying what I was supposed to be studying to get a degree, I was studying the translated Soviet text. And in there, I kept seeing this M/S and MS superscript -1. And I'm like, man, what is that? I had no idea. It had some numbers in front of it, but I'm like, I'll figure this out eventually. And then in the early 2000s, it's a quarter of a century ago, essentially now. I can't remember what year, but we went out to see Buddy Morris and Tom Oslinski with the Browns, and Cleveland and Columbus. While they are several hours apart, if you're traveling from Springfield, Missouri, it ain't that long of a drive from one to the other. So we also went and visited Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell. And Lou had just gotten the Tendo in, and this was the first Tendo that was in the United States, and I got to see it. And it had M/S on it. So it had uh, velocity in meters per second, and I think feet per second, and might have had power in gosh, I can't remember there, but it was old. It had imperial units on it, which was crazy. But looking at it, I go, hey Rick, I know what to do with that. And we took it back and we started testing our guys, like our juniors and seniors who had good technique and everything and were strong already. They've been training for 3 years. And we collected load velocity profiles. Now, I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, but that's what it was. We started somewhere around 60% and worked our way up to 100. And the guys, even though that there were different heights, it wasn't that different for the guys that have been training. Now, I didn't test the first and second year people. Why would you do that? Because they need something different than the third or fourth year people. So, I did that. And then whenever I went up to Missouri, we ended up repeating it again. Whenever we were like, gosh, we're super strong, but we need to become more explosive. And I'm like, hey, I know what to do. And I said that to Pat, and imagine a graduate assistant going up and telling the director of strength and conditioning, we need to make a change and this be the one. So, good on him for Pat Ivy not firing me right then and there. But then that's really what led to our transition and starting to delve into sports science and going down all the different levels and rabbit holes that we did. We started to get, more speed and power for about an extra 18 months, where it was, normally 6 months to a year for the transfer of the weight room over to sprint speeds and jumping ability. Uh, we ended up getting it up to about 3 years before it plateaued. And so then that allowed us for another year and a half of development over compared to the other teams. And uh, and I won't say it's the reason that we established that dynasty at Mizzou back when we did. Everybody's like, "Oh, this Eli Drinkwitz, it's the greatest era ever." It's like, nah, 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 man. I was a part of the Gary Pinkel era. So yeah, you do this for another decade, 15 more years, and then let's see how it looks. But yeah, so then we were getting all that extra development with these 2 and 3 star recruits. So they came in at 2 or 3, and they're leaving at 4 star essentially. So it just allowed us to get more development with the guys. So they were still getting the strength development. I don't want anybody thinking they were doing VBT right from jump. No, they weren't. They were doing it whenever their strength gain started to peter out. Excuse me, the transfer of strength to jumping ability and sprinting ability started to peter out, and then it made it just go for a little bit longer. Now, if I had it to do all over again, I think that after the adaptation from the VBT on the squats and things like that, I probably should have changed up exercises, so then we could look more at things like joint angle specificity and some other, specificities that we could break out to do that. Because, the only thing that we did was we took the heavy exercises and we put a little speed on them, and that allowed us to get a little bit more adaptation. And then it allowed for auto regulation as well. So then the guys, point 0.8 was always that percentage, right? So if you were having a great day, point 0.8 was 60% of your really good day. And on bad days, point 0.8 was 60% of whatever you were on that really bad day. And we really liked that because in season, that would allow us to make sure we're using the right loads, because you got a guy that got 80 snaps and a guy that got 10 snaps. Well, the guy that got 80 snaps, it's a lot more wear on the tires. That's taking off a lot more tread than those 10 snaps. So the 10 snap guy was pushing harder. The 80 snap guy wasn't throwing as much load on his back, and it allowed everybody to sort of adapt. Was it right? Was it the best thing? I got no idea, but I do know this. It worked.
A quick sidebar on that. You said you guys were getting these units in that early 2000s. Like when were you, how much were these units and where were you getting them from? Like especially being a grad assistant and asking a head coach to get that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. I can't imagine. I mean, right now they're still kind of expensive and the price is way down. I can't imagine where you're getting them and how expensive those were when you first got them.
Yeah, so that's a good question for Bert Soren, because he was the only distributor of Tendo at that point in time. So we had to get him through Sorenex, and I think the first one that Rick got was he bought it with his own money, and I want to say it was like $1,200. And then, it ended up being like 15, $1,700. And, it's like, okay, well, that's a lot. Yeah, but that was 23, 25 years ago, right? So that was, that's like $5,000 now, probably. I have no idea how much inflation's gone up, but I do know this. Well, this crap right here used to cost $1.75, and this thing costs $3.25 downstairs now. So, you tell me how much it would be. Uh, I don't know why I brought that up, but no, it was Sornex was the sole distributor, and they were like 13, $1,400 back then. I don't know what a Tendo costs now, but I'm a, there's a lot of different units out there, and the one that I like the most at this current point in time is GymAware, and they're probably 22, $2,500, but they'll do more than what anybody probably needs reasonably for the most part. But in the studies that I've done, we did a error rate study and found that, it was the most consistent. It's right there, on par with Vicon. And it makes sense because it's with that x-axis correction and the manner at which it does the components and everything else. It's almost like you're checking the Vicon with the GymAware because it's a direct measurement of distance and time. Uh, but that doesn't matter, because you've got more directions that it can move. So you got to make sure for the accuracy and the man. I can't remember what Jenna's Vicon samples at. I want to say it's 240, 250 hertz, which is, some of the units measure at 30, some of the units measure at 60. So that's between 4 and 8 times faster. So you'll always get a little bit more fidelity because of that, how often the sampling rate occurs.
And it was super cool to hear you kind of predicted that in your book too. I don't know if you remember writing it, but you're talking about the price of it and how you were talking about as this gets more popular, there's going to be cheaper devices that come out and more popular devices that come out, and you're going to be able to basically compare the numbers that you got on your device compared to like yourself, which I think is really cool too. Like
Yeah.
I think you can get the OVR for $300, and if it's not the most accurate, I still think the cool thing that you can do now is like hook a bunch of athletes up to it. And even if it's like the number itself isn't the most accurate, you can compare that number to their previous number, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So as long as it's really reliable, I call it bathroom scale theory. The
Yes,
reliability to
that's
me is the
yes, you
number
mentioned
one.
this. Yes.
Oh God. So I talk about this thing all the time. Yeah. So as long as if I step on my bathroom scale, I know if I gained or lost weight. So as long as the unit's reliable, that's all that matters. But there are units that are not reliable. I'm not gonna name names. I don't want that smoke. But people can do their research, and they can look at some of the stuff that Dr. Jonathan Weekly down at Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, down in Australia. He's done some work on the accuracy, reliability, and validity. We've done some work whenever I was at Miami with some aerospace engineers on the accuracy and validity of different devices. Well, the error rates of different devices, and some of them really surprised me. But I'm not. Again, I'm not in a good way. They surprised me in a bad way. I was like, "How in God's name can you f this up in that manner that you're measuring this in?" But they say it's cheap meat ain't good and good meat ain't cheap. Well, one of the things that was cheap and selling itself like it was awesome was the toughest steak you'd ever eat. But it just is what it is.
Yeah,
So as long as you know that you've got a very, very reliable device, even if it's not as accurate as it could be, you're going to be all right. You're going to get publications out of it? No, 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 no. But you will, yeah, you'll get something to go off of, and at least if nothing else, you'll get the feedback, which can drive intent, and that's going to lead to better adaptations, anyways.
absolutely. And that's one of the main things that I found using it within this last couple of weeks. But one of the things that I really thought was cool is like you get this Tendo unit, you bring it now it's like kind of like a live experimentation, like because
Hmm.
you're one of the first people in the United States that has this. You're going off some copy papers of like other people using it, but like you're kind of actively demonstrating with this. And one of the cool things that I know you wrote is like you realize your cleans weren't real cleans, or they weren't eliciting the stimulus that you had. So, like, what were some of those like eye-opening moments where you hooked it up and you're like, damn, we've been messing this up, or like everybody's messing this up pretty much. Like nobody's doing this thing right. It's not an actual clean.
Yeah, it actually kind of confirmed what another one of our staff members was saying at the time. He was like, "Well, we're cleaning, but why are we supposed to be cleaning? We're supposed to be doing it to get fast. Well, all we care about is the weight on the bar, so you're not really doing the purpose of the clean." And he was right. We had lost the intent, that there was no adaptation of explosive power for that. And whoo, man, I thought I was going to get my head chopped off whenever I told Pat Ivy that. And man, yeah, I still remember that look to this day. That's not a look a GA wants to get from his boss, but I had the testicular fortitude to do it. So, but it was a tough one. You had to see that we had absolutely nothing there, and it was because we were doing the movement wrong, man. If we were doing the cleans as they were intended, maybe we wouldn't have ever needed the device to begin with. Just to be completely honest. Our cleans, because Gary Pankel wanted numbers, had turned into a kind of demo deadlift with a reverse curl, limbo, and lateral lunge, as opposed to doing anything like a true clean. And we weren't seeing the explosive adaptations as a result. And then whenever we threw that on, what did that decrease in load do for us? Well, it forced hip extension and velocity. So then we started to see a transfer. Body composition is always number one. Squat was still number two, but clean became a significant relationship. Now, some people would say, well, that's just because you guys, you stacked the deck, you did it wrong. Well, we didn't do it wrong intentionally. They were messing it up for the previous 5 years, if that was the case. No, it wasn't our intention. It wasn't until we noticed what was wrong that we could fix it. And then I'm not saying velocity was the only fix. We could have cleaned up technique or something else, but the problem with that was we have a numbers oriented coach. So we had to have a criteria. And whenever he understood that if they did it above this criteria as opposed to just standing up with it, they saw better results. He's like, okay, cool. The trained guys get to do that. And that's one of the things people need to realize is that it wasn't everybody for us, or in anybody that I've ever trained gets to use VBT. It's something that they have to earn the right to do. And they earn the right through making the appropriate adaptations and training, right? We've got to have that increase in cross-sectional area to be able to withstand and produce more forces. We have to have Henneman size principle to send down that quantal, that huger amount of electricity at one point in time to cross those higher thresholds, electrical thresholds to get the high threshold motor units. And it's not until that point in time, whenever we maximize that, where we have to worry about the signal coming down so much faster, right? So it's not everybody needs it. It's a nice to have. It's not a need to have. And it just it made it better and it made it more fun and allowed to gamify. But it was a nice to, not a need to have.
And what was that like culture shift like? Because you talk about how people are doing it wrong for the 5 years before you, but there's still like there's still many programs that I look at where it's like just move as much weight as possible and
Yeah.
like get the clean up as much as possible. And now you're trying to shift a culture where what is rewarded is cleaning 400 pounds or you're not playing, cleaning 400 pounds or you're not training hard, right? Now it's backing it off. And like what's that approach like? Trying to change that, trying to get people to understand that, whether it's admin or coaches or specifically the athletes that are used to cleaning 400. Now you're like, dude, you got to bump this down. You got to bump this to 300 to be able to stay within these numbers. Like, did you have any frustrated athletes, that type of thing, that were unable to like get to those numbers that they wanted to?
Well, yeah, we did. But the way that we did it was with data, right? And so what I ended up doing is have you ever read Zatsiorsky's power hold on, Science and Practice of Strength Training?
Mm-mm.
So in that book, he talks about the explosive strength deficit, right? And that is I believe it was your static jump divided by your counter movement jump times 100. And that gave you a percentage of, what your explosive power expression was. We bastardized it because we didn't have force plates. You got to remember that it's only been since like what, Man, 2015, I think, is whenever Hawken came out and they started dropping the prices of the single axis force plates. Yes, Pasco was around before that and they were cheaper, but you had to program yourself. You had to code it and run everything through. There wasn't anything automated. Now, so what I started doing was I used the counter movement jump and I converted it over to watts through the use of the Sayers equation. And then I divided it by squat plus body weight. So we have our explosive movement and we had our strength movement. And if somebody's strength training caused their explosive ability to go down, we changed the training to make it more explosive. So they knew why they were doing it. It's like, okay, you're already strong enough, but you're too slow for how strong you are. So we need to move the bar, get the bar a little lighter and moving faster. And we're going to use this as a criteria. And also, one of the things too that's a little bit different that people might not be thinking about is that we made it something that the athletes earned through hard work. They earned the right to use the Tendo. So if anybody was using the Tendo, everybody in that room knew that that guy had done something, and that meant something. It wasn't just something that was given to everybody. And so they had to earn the right to use VBT. They had to earn the right to use the advanced programming. And if somebody, it only happened one time that I can remember while I was on staff working with football there at Missouri, that we ever had to bust somebody back a level. And because they knew what it meant. And they knew that if it wasn't like we were standing over the top of him like you do this or you're losing it. No, we didn't have to. But it was a dude that just always wanted to dog it. He thought he made it and he could just coast, and it was like no, not acceptable.
You're back to
You get
percentages, baby.
exactly, and things like that only have to happen one time. And everything gets fixed after that.
That was going to be my question of did you ever have to bring anybody back and how often did that occur?
One time.
But you seem to have answered it right there.
Yeah, now I think if we would have done it differently, if it would have been rolled out widespread and this is just what everybody's going to do, well, two things. One, they didn't have the stuff that they needed to see the adaptation from it, if we try to do it that way, so they're not going to get as good of an adaptation. And two, guys were going to coast because they knew that they could. If I go with half effort, the bar moves slower, and that means I lift less weight. Well, it kind of goes back in with how everything is set up, right? Because we were really using one of the things that people don't realize too about our time at Missouri and what made it special was actually our track coach. Now, it's like, what the hell's a track coach have to do with football team? Rick McGuire is often considered the father of sports psychology, right? And as the father of sports psychology, you think what that can do for the different teams, right? So we knew about self-determination theory through DC and Ryan and used the velocity-based training and some of those other things to drive that intrinsic motivation through that DC and Ryan's three-pronged approach, which is autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So they got the autonomy because they knew if they wanted to get better, they needed to lift more weight on that. And they were in charge of it. The relatedness, because we had taught them that the exercise, what the adaptations meant, right? So you'll get faster, you'll jump higher, et cetera. And then the competence that they were already good at that movement. We weren't releasing them to go hog wild on something that they sucked at. So they had to achieve those things and become intrinsically motivated during that process as a part of the program. Now, and I really think that's what allowed us to get the results that we did. It wasn't widespread. You had to earn it, and I think there's something to that. I have no research to back that up, but you don't value that which was it you do not esteem that which you did not earn. So if you didn't earn the right to use that, do you care? Probably not. But if you had to work your ass off to get to it, it means something.
Well, that's a really cool way to like talk about this too, because I was really interested in asking you about the like percentage based versus like velocity based training because new to the Oli world within this like last year and a half, I got on a quest to clean 405. So started cleaning for the first time in a long time and was following a percentage based program for a long time. And one of the nice things about the percentage based program was everything is set in stone. It's like anti auto regulation. You don't have to think
Mhm.
about auto regulation. And show up every single day, and it almost like felt like bringing your lunch pail to the gym. Like it was lunch
Yeah.
pail, regardless of how you feel, you're getting those percentages done, and got pretty strong, was doing it. But I was like beat up. Like I was definitely getting beat up, definitely on days where I was like sending it when I shouldn't have because it's percentages and it was much more set in stone. Now switching to the VBT, there are days where it's like I know I could squeeze out technically more of that session, but I'm trying to stay within my VBT zone, and I feel so much better. And within this last couple of weeks, I like it's like an extra gear that I have when I went on
Yeah.
my on days, but on my off days, it almost feels like I'm coasting. But again, I've gone through the process of many years of weightlifting to where I know that's like I know when you feel beat up, I know when I need to push more. But I don't think I would have got that if I didn't do a lot of these percentage-based programs previously in my life, where it was like that lunch pail type approach. And it's kind of like the balance of like when do you do that? Where it's like to me, VBT makes more sense physiologically, right? Like you're gonna get the stimulus that you done that day if you're psychologically in the mindset to do it. Whereas the percentage-based program is much less like almost purposely less auto-regulatory, and you're kind of grinding yourself into halts, and you have to like find that balance somehow with these athletes.
I think that you have to go through the grinding to be able to do the other. I don't think you're going to understand it any other way, to be honest. And through that grinding, well, that's building the cross-sectional area. That's teaching you fatigue. That is teaching you how to still work and show up. Because, you know, on the one hand, and there's some coaches that oppose VBT with this exact point, and I'll give it to them that on the you do whenever it is 4th and 1 in the last couple of seconds of the game, who cares about your feelings? Who cares if you're tired? You have to go. And the percentage-based training does force that. But that only works for so long. And then, like you had mentioned, you could feel the grinding, the wearing on the body. It takes a lot of tread off the tire. Well, then we can change it up and train a little bit more smartly later on. And I kind of think that the people who do the best with autoregulation are the people who were the work the grind, put the nose to the grindstone till you got a flat nose kind.
The
Right.
mules.
Yeah, you've got to just push and push and push, and then you understand what ease means and when you need to take these breaks. And if you didn't ever do that, if you didn't ever grind, this ain't nothing. It isn't. And I don't think that the people had pushed their nervous system or their neuromuscular system to the extremes to be able to elicit those kinds of adaptations that it makes it really beneficial whenever you get that additional rate coding on there. Yeah, because if you don't do it on the right, it's like we just lost Anatoly Bondarchuk a couple of weeks ago. But one thing that he had instilled into me through working with him on a few books was everything has a order, and you have to put the adaptations in the appropriate order. And if you don't, you lose the adaptation twice. You lose it the first time because you don't have the other prerequisites available. Maybe it's the cross-sectional area, maybe it's the electrical threshold, the quantum, how much, the quantity coming down at one time. Maybe it's, X, Y, and Z. But you won't see that huge jump as a result. And then you don't see it the second time because you already made that adaptation earlier. So you don't see that big jump whenever you do have all those things. So I think if there's no grinding, if the person's never grinded and the first thing they learn how to do is VBT, I don't know if it's necessarily for younger athletes, I don't necessarily know if that's the best idea. Now, if we're talking about somebody who is in the aging population or in Parkinson's or something where, yeah, they don't have a high training age, but life has worn out their tires, those are the people who should start with VBT.
I have a question a little off topic here. What are your thoughts on VBT for maybe endurance athletes? So somebody who already has like a crazy demand and they are lifting purely to get better at their sport, say, cross country runners, long distance cyclists, rowers, or something like that, and using that to almost auto regulate the load so that they're not thrashed going into their other already hard training.
That's a great question, Tristan. And to be completely candid, I'm not the guy to ask that. I didn't have endurance athletes. I think that if it were me, I would think that the for a endurance athlete, the ability to better utilize and recruit stored elastic energy would be the way to go. So somebody doing, plyometrics so that the movement then was coming from the stretch and release of the parallel and series elastic components instead of the contractile components, demanding oxygen would be the magic bullet, so to speak. And there's a few studies out there that have examined the effects of plyometrics on endurance and found the exact same thing. It doesn't improve running speed, but it does improve running economy drastically, which is just how much oxygen you're using to maintain that same speed. So I don't know if rate coding, the enhancement of rate coding would be good because that also would increase the synchronicity of the movement. Now, while that sounds great, that's great for force and power. But what are we doing? We're doing endurance. We're just trying to keep it moving. So then that means all of the motor units are going instead of just the motor units that need to go, right? So it almost seems to me that, the jump training, the plyometrics would be better for VBT because it's still allowing for that more of the asynchronous as opposed to synchronous of the firing of the motor units.
Hell yeah. All right, I'm gonna nerd out with you a little bit on these Olympic lifts and
Yeah.
what I've been experimenting with. So, been using the VBT for all my Olympic lifts. I have when I use it for my squats, bench, deadlift, it's a super clean number. It makes total sense. I stay within my zones, like the numbers match up.
Hmm.
What I've been finding with the Olympic lifts is it's almost not even like an auto regulation for my central nervous system that day. There'll be days when I'm jumping really good, squatting really good, and then the numbers are down, the speed numbers are down on the Olympic lifts. And what I've found is it's like almost like an auto regulation for how the technique is that day. And
Yeah.
it's not a negative thing. Like it's almost such a really cool thing of it's a piece of feedback of how efficiently are you moving this bar because like you can try and grip and rip a bar at a certain weight, especially anything over like 80%, and it's not going to move the way that you want to move it. And that's been a really cool find in my brief studies with this with the Olympic lifts is it almost like forces you to move more efficiently if you want to stay within those zones.
Absolutely. The movement quality has got to improve. And I wish I could remember the author, but there's some authors that actually looked at the utilization of, I could probably go down the hall and Bo might know it, but that with the anterior posterior displacement of the barbell, which would come through, you're not going to get it through OVR, you wouldn't get it through Tendo. You would need one of the units with x-axis correction or potentially an IMU, but I just don't trust IMUs overall. It's not good at bad. I mean, it's great at what they do. They measure acceleration, but then they estimate velocity. So whenever you're estimating something, that always introduces error. So I'm not the biggest fan of the IMU. But anyway, Austin, what I was going to say was I think it's showing the alteration in your technique, because just if the nervous system, hmm, do you guys happen to do anything with marksmanship, either one of you?
Tristan shoots, yeah.
Yeah, I like shooting.
So yeah, all I know is archery. Okay, I can't. Me and guns don't have a good relationship, right? That's not for today. But I do know that if I try and rush anything, well, then I end up jerking one way or another, and that affects the accuracy of my shot. But I could throw something that's very, very simple just as hard. Well, just because we have our nervous system firing on all cylinders, that doesn't mean that all those cylinders timing is going to be fantastic. So if your timing is a little off because maybe the bar's coming up faster than what you're used to, that could throw it off, right? And Olympic lifting, weightlifting, to use the correct term so Bo doesn't bust down my door and kill me, uh, it's very, very technical, right? It is highly skilled. In powerlifting, it was great. I don't remember a single squat over 900 pounds, and I've squatted over 1,000 because I would get myself so insane before going up to the barbell that I just went berserk. You can't do that and be a good Olympic lifter. You have to stay in the pocket and maintain your technique. So sometimes I think that chasing bar velocity costs technique with Olympic weightlifters. And then the juice isn't worth the squeeze there sometimes. But that's because Olympic weightlifting is the sport. It is SPP. So you're basically doing what the sport coach is doing. Well, for football, these things are not the sport. They're very, very general. So Austin, I think for you, the change in the velocity, I think you nailed it on the head. It's the change in technique that's occurring. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. It's that skillful application of force that we have to get to. And if it is not skillful that day because you came on too hard and fast or too late, it ain't gonna go.
Well, and one of the things that I'm thinking about too is like just when I'm working with this stuff, it's like, are you doing Olympic lifts for the benefit of like just getting better at Olympic lifts? Are you doing Olympic lifts for the stimulus that they provide? And that's one of the cool things. And again, these are all just working theories that I've been thinking about is using the VBT to get the stimulus out of the Olympic lifts, out of weightlifting strictly for the stimulus and not
Mhm.
necessarily, and I'm not saying throw out all technique, but move that bar to stay within that stimulus and get the intent that done that you want that day. And that's how I've been kind of approaching it. And it's been kind of wild. The again, like the extra gear that I feel like within this short span of doing that. And now I'm just kind of backing off and doing some technical work on the side, just to be able to make sure I'm getting some of the technical work. But that actual just intent of like moving that bar fast and explosively for the first time has unlocked something that has been kind of wild. But again, it's such a balance with weightlifting because once you start to lose that technique, it gets harder. Well, the bar's moving faster, or like it's
Yeah.
all jacked up. Well, the bar's moving faster. But can you use the Olympic lifts strictly for the stimulus that you want out of it with VBT?
I only look at things as what stimulus that it is providing. I'm not looking at it any other way anymore, right? I used to think that, a back squat with, I used to get way too, get where's that thing called that you slice things up with the surgical scalpel. I used to get a scalpel up and like make everything razor thin and have all these different things. Now I just chase the stimulus, right? Am I trying to get speed, strength? Am I having to, the emphasis of velocity, or is it doing more force? And I think that if you would pick the appropriate derivative as opposed to trying to pick the appropriate load, if that makes sense, then you can do it a little bit better. You can get in a little bit more fidelity. If you're trying to really get that velocity into the spectrum up, you could do a jump shrug. Or, if you are trying to go more towards the force end of the spectrum, well, then you might set it up on blocks, or, or you just do yeah, do it from, pick it up and do a mid-thigh pulls, right? Not the isometrics. I mean, the actual mid-thigh pull. I'm just assuming the listenership here understands Olympic weightlifting. Um, and you can find a lot of more information on that from Tim Sukamel and Paul Comfort have done a couple of papers on the different weightlifting derivatives. And, some are obviously more force dominant, some are more velocity dominant. But any of them that you look at, you're not going to say, oh, well, that blah, blah, blah. Except for in one of their studies, there's always been this long thought. I'm going to piss people off, but I'm going to say it anyways. There's a lot of people out there who will say that you need to do the Olympic lifts and do the catch because of the double impulse. Well, let's think about this for a second. What is impulse? Well, impulse is force times time. Okay. Now, what is force? Well, mass times acceleration. Let me ask you this. Where are you supposed to catch the barbell whenever you're doing an Olympic weightlifting movement? You're supposed to
Like,
catch it at the top
yeah.
where it's motionless for a second, right? Well, if it's motionless, what's its acceleration? Zero. I'm not an Einstein, but anything times zero is zero. I remember that from third grade. Well, you actually are having a lower force whenever you do the catch, as opposed to doing a derivative, a pull, and holding onto the bar. You actually have a much higher eccentric force in landing there. So, but back to the point is, I think that we need to break things down by trait and try and figure out what you're trying to develop, and then put in the appropriate derivatives to really push that aspect and keep training the clean to have your technique, but you're getting your emphasis towards force or towards velocity from the derivatives through the special exercises. And whenever we get down to it, that's exactly what the Soviets were doing with their weightlifting squads back in the day whenever they were winning all the Olympics. Now, and if that sounds familiar to anybody, it's like, wait, this kind of sounds like dynamic effort and maximal effort. Yeah, no kidding. Who do you think Louis Simmons got the information from? He was studying the weightlifting manuals, and that's where Lou got a lot of his stuff from. Now he did misinterpret some things. You know, they were looking at more sequential versus concurrent, but he it happened to work just fine.
Well, and the really cool thing that you mentioned the dynamic effort days, and it's like I've through my football days and through my throwing days, we were doing dynamic effort stuff. But like, dude, hooking up a VBT to a bar shows you like you're not even close to some of these dynamic effort days and the velocity zones you're supposed to be in. And that has been one of the biggest eye openers to this whole experience is like how hard it actually is, especially for a force dominant athlete like myself,
Yeah.
to move a bar that quickly and that explosively. And like it's light. It feels so light. I'm not ever close to missing it, but it's like I have to go into such like an extra gear to get it to that zone, to get it to that spot. I'm like, man, I have never been doing this before. And I can tell I've never been doing this before because of how taxing 65% feels when I'm done.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it just neurally, I feel completely fried by the end of it. I'm like, dude, what is happening? This is 65%. I can do this for 100 reps. And it's unbelievable. It's such a cool like experience to like
Yeah.
feel that zone and actually work a real dynamic effort day for the first time in probably my life.
Man, after max effort days, I would usually feel a lot better than I did after dynamic effort days. And that went for the gym and especially, not every time at West Side, because there was a couple of times whenever I went there and I got worked over on max effort day. But, there too, for the most part, that for me, I'm not, and that's probably because, just like you'd mentioned, you're force dominant, so am I. Dude, I could squat, back in the day, I squatted 1,000 pounds, but you could time my 40 with a sundial. Right. So, everybody who keeps saying that, that you have to get super strong to be fast. Well, what happened to me? Right. So, I always say if you want to be fast, train fast. And some people say if you want to be fast, train slow and heavy. And to me, the two it just doesn't, the math doesn't math there for me.
And what's your thought process on like the people that say like their approach is the barbell is meant to move slow and nothing's going to match the velocity of a sprint or a jump or a plyometric. So like why don't we live at the two ends of the extreme? Because I've heard that argument before of just like
Yeah.
sprint fast and then lift heavy slow, and not really focusing on the different shades that you can use in the weight room.
Well, what I say to that is we got an extra year and a half of speed development and jumping development. So, I think that there's something to it. Yeah, there is something to what they're saying as well, but heavy and slow doesn't always translate to speed, right? Because we only have however long the person's foot is in contact with the ground to produce force. Now we know that that's what, like maybe 150, 200 milliseconds for the first step or two for sprinting. But then it gets down to, was it like 80, 90 milliseconds for bad sprinters and 65 if you're 68 if you're Usain Bolt. Um, that's not much time. So going heavy and is great. Yeah, you up Henneman size principle. But my thought is we need to move away from this. Whenever people are just giving this either or, it's, you have to do it at the two ends of the spectrum. Well, great. What if somebody has already maximized the force into the spectrum and they've maximized what they're doing here? What do we do now? Well, I think that we need to have other evaluative means, and I don't always think that lifting weights is the answer anymore. I used to, but here we are in 2020. I say 2025. What is it? Yeah, it's 2026. So here we are in 2026. I don't still think that same way because I've seen it happen other ways. Now, I'm not saying if somebody is weak, getting them stronger won't improve their speed. It will. F equals ma, right? And if provided that they're producing the force within the 200 milliseconds, A from algebra equals F over m. Absolutely true. As long as they're able to express that force within that time constraint. Otherwise, we need to find what is the other low-hanging fruit. And a lot of times it might be something like, Well, fast stretch shortening cycle activation or slow stretch shortening cycle activation, or maybe it is rate coding, or maybe it is blah, blah, blah. But here's the deal. If you do what you always done, you're going to get what you always got. And that's why we stopped seeing speed and jumping improvements after about 15 months. Okay. And then we ended up getting up to about 3 years. But that's what I would have to say to that is we can't simply just look at it as either or. We have to figure out what's your low-hanging fruit. Okay. Maybe you're really, really good at strong. Maybe you're really, really good at unloaded, but you suck at the stretch shortening cycle. Well, guess what? Lifting heavy and doing unloaded is not going to fix that. We need to have targeted training. So I think that we need to, and dude, me and VBT, I think also misguided some people because they thought all we have to do is lift the bar fast. Well, no, I thought you knew you needed to get strong before you did this, and you needed to have good technique before you did this. And I thought that maybe you would realize that stretch shortening cycle had fast and slow, and and there are different adaptations as a result of this, So there's just a lot of things that go into it. It's not as, on one hand, it's not rocket surgery. On the other hand, well, it ain't tiddlywinks either. So, the truth lies somewhere in the middle, but the truth is moving because we're always constantly changing. The humans undergo allostasis, not homeostasis. So we have to be able to keep chasing and challenging all of these aspects.
Yeah, that's such a cool explanation because that's exactly what I wrote down about the low-hanging fruit, especially with those higher velocity movements with the bar of just how quickly my body's adapted to it because I was so shit at it. Like, and it was like
Yeah,
such a fast improvement because again, I had spent a ton of time over here and a ton of time with just like basic sprints and basic jumps, and there was a lot in the middle just to squeeze the juice out of. And then like same thing, I've been talking about this when I've been doing it. It's like I don't think this progression is going to last forever, but it's like just something I'm so bad at right now that just focusing on it for this time period has led to pretty quick results because of how low hanging the fruit was.
yeah. Dude, if you get better at something you suck at, it's pretty noticeable pretty fast.
Yeah.
I've been to the archery ranges the past few weeks in a row. I've had a bow for a couple of years, but I just said to Bo before the semester, I'm like, damn it, I need to find some me time. You can edit that part out. Oops. Uh, but I need to, I've been saying for a long time, I need to get some me time in there, and we've been going out to the range every week since I got a bow. I might as well use it. How much better I have gotten so quickly in these past few weeks. It's actually, I was telling him today, it's like, dude, I know we've been shooting for an hour, but I want to go for another hour. We don't have time for it. But look, you see, whenever I switched it up and I was using this pin at this distance now, all of a sudden I'm in the middle of the target, not all the way at the bottom. Let's keep shooting. And, but the point is that you find something, you get better at it, and it really, then you got to find the next thing. But it is just whenever you really suck at it, you get better real quick, and that's what makes it fun, and that's what sets the hook in.
Well, changing tones a little bit here, you talk about finding the next thing and having some me time. I think it's really cool to hear about your journey going from being a coach to being a professor and like finding the next thing and not
Yeah,
just the training world, but in your career world. What was that process like and what's it like now?
man, it's all Yogi Berra. You see a fork in the road, you pick it up. And that's just while people are like, "Oh, that's stupid." No, it's talking about opportunity. So I'm an opportunist, and every opportunity that's come along, that was good, I took it. Whenever I was at Missouri, I had the opportunity to go work at Auburn. And whenever I took the interview, the PT school said, "Hey, we don't think that we want you to go there. We see some utility in you here. Give me 4 days and I'll have you a job." True to his word, he did. And that's whenever I made the jump to being full-time coach to half coach and half academic back in 2012. Rode that cycle up to 2018. And, it's like, why? Why did I do it that way? Because I'm freaking ADHD. I got to have 10 million things going on all the time. And then, it just came from those right opportunities. And then, Miami, I was volunteering, doing some sports science stuff there. And then Aaron Feld was like, "Hey, come do this with us, because these other people want you to do it." So then I did it, and now here we are at A&M. It's just if there's an opportunity come along, I want to take a shot. Because why not? The people who don't are the people who don't are usually the loudest critics, but they're doing it from their couch, right? So, I want to be that man in the arena all the time. And not saying like physically fighting anymore. I did have that period, and that was 27 years ago. I'm way too old for that stuff now. But I mean, like I'm always going to be out there. I'm going to try something. I'm going to give it a shot. And if it works, amazing. And if it doesn't, oh well, at least I tried.
Do you think that when you were doing those half and half roles as like an academic and a coach, it also improved your ability at each position?
Yeah.
Just being
Hmm.
able to communicate with two different groups of people and take the lessons you learn from communicating with this group to the other group?
Yeah, and actually, I think it forced me to understand things at a much greater degree than I did in coaching. I wasn't dumb whenever I was coaching, but didn't have the understanding of all how the organelles interacted and all the different aspects of adaptations to training and what occurred at the brain and what occurred down the line. Because guess what? I didn't have time to because I had the next group coming in. So I think that if I did not do either, if I didn't do both roles at the same time, I would have been content doing whatever I was doing, as opposed to having this light of fire under me and be like, ooh, okay, if that happens, what's going to happen over here? And then what would this mean? And what would that mean? And the like. So yeah, Tristan, I think that teaching made me a better coach. In coaching, dude, whenever I talk in class, you can ask my students. We talk in stories all the time. I'm telling you what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel, right? How many professors do you have that could tell you theoretically what this stuff was supposed to, what this was to do? Nah, man, I can tell you what it was like whenever it was pouring down, raining thunder and lightning when we were playing Nebraska in like 2010 and the lights went out and the Doc Mung Soo dang near broke Blaine Gabbert's ankle, had to get, stuff in, had to get a PRP injection and some other things. He was out for, a couple of weeks. And it was so cold and my underwear was soaked and it was the most uncomfortable I've ever been in my entire life, right? Most other professors aren't going to be able to talk about those things. Or, being in the locker room and trying to control a 370 pound man before he tries to murder a 220-pound man for calling something to his mama, right? I can tell you, I can tell you how I handled those. I can also tell you I wouldn't do it the same way these days. But I can give those examples, and I think that that drives home a further, deeper education that our students get here, so that whenever they go out into the workforce, they've got more ideas. They know more of what to expect. They aren't going to get caught. They'll still get caught with their pants down. Don't. I'm not saying that I'm perfect and I'm going to have everybody ready. No, but if you thought it was going to be all sunshine, rainbows, and squirrels, nah, man, I can tell you where the bombs are. The not bombs, but the I'm trying to think of another word other than
Pitfalls.
there you go. I could show you what pitfalls to miss. You know, I know where those are going to be at.
So with you getting to A&M, I just finished up a master's program at Pitt around a year ago for
Hmm.
sports science, and one of the reasons I ended up picking that was on their website, on their program, there was a tons of hands-on experience. Like
Hmm.
part of their curriculum was getting 500 hours with one of their D1 teams or clubs or
Yeah.
something. And so that was awesome. How do you best develop students and stuff by getting them that practical experience, like being a coach and being in that environment, but also the actual academic understanding so that they can have the knowledge so they can back up those coaching claims?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do absolutely have a practicum class, and many of our students do their internships with athletics, but there's only X number of spots available within athletics. So we're also looking at, rec sports because well, I'm saying rec sports, that it's club, right? And we've got the biggest club sports program in the nation. I think that there's like 270 club teams here, something ungodly like that. So actually, in 2 days, we're going to be meeting with some people to talk about how we can help them better serve their club teams. So then these athletes, yeah, they'll have to have their workout signed off by myself or Bo or somebody, and Brian Crutcher, but we will, sign off on it and they'll go implement it. And then they're going to get to learn and make the mistakes that I got to do whenever I was their age, because it was two people, 21 sports, 530 athletes. So, they're going to be able to make more mistakes and not have I'll say it this way. Uh, there was a guy that I know. I'm going to leave the names of the strength and conditioning coaches out, right? Just because I never asked him if I could tell this story. That they were on the Tennessee staff whenever Tennessee won a national championship in football, and they said that Phil Fulmer called the head strength and conditioning coach down and all the assistants in there, and he said, "Boys, I want you to know something. I can get another strength coach tomorrow, but I cannot get another Peyton Manning. You hurt his ass, you're fired." Right? So if I don't want to put a master student into one of those sorts of situations that could get people losing their jobs. So, yes, there are some master students who do that, but I think it's a lot more. I'm not going to say it's consequence free, but if you make mistakes, the consequences aren't as big whenever we have some of those other teams. I'm who I am today because I got to make those mistakes whenever I was younger. Having teams like field hockey, uh, golf, tennis, look, gosh, what was the other team that I had at Mizzou, SMS? Field hockey, yeah, field hockey, softball, soccer, in those sports that are, if it doesn't work, the consequences aren't as high. And I think that, those the students getting those opportunities with rec sports, they get to make those mistakes too, and they'll learn. And we'll let them make the mistakes. Some, we're not going to let them do something stupid like saying, I'm going to do 107% for 5 sets of 10. Of course, they're not doing anything like that, but they will make their mistakes and they will learn from them and we'll move forward
Dude,
with
imagine those
guidance.
poor other club teams that just like are all scrambled and all over the place, and then your guys' squad shows up with disciples of Dr. Mann
Man, that's what I'm hoping.
showing up.
That's what I'm hoping, man, that we just we go on this nationwide tear and the club sports kings are Texas A&M. But
That would be
that's
badass.
the goal. That's
Um,
definitely the goal.
one of the things you mentioned before we started this podcast was how human performance and sports performance isn't all that different. And I thought that was such a cool way you phrased it and then thing you were talking about. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so it really started for me whenever I went to Miami and started working with a guy named Joe Signorelli down there. And to be honest with you, he is the reason why I went to Miami. I'm like, dude, I've never had a mentor, so this guy can teach me something. And I started looking at things a little bit differently with him. And then the light bulb turned on one day whenever we were talking about it was a study that he had done, Signorelli had done with this guy named Ming Ni, I believe was the guy's name. And they were looking at how the load at peak power had changed as a result of high velocity resistance training. And then all the wheels started clicking and things started turning in my head. The wheels started turning in my head. And I was like, okay, wow. So all that we had to do was bring up the velocity into the spectrum, and that improved everything for them. Well, then we started looking at things like Titan and how Titan has and Joe's who I got this from. Like Titan is not just Titan. There's different isomers of Titan, and they are going to respond to different types of training and convert into the different isomers. Lactate dehydrogenase actually has 5 isomers, 5 different forms of LDH, and the training that you do facilitates those conversions. So whenever we started thinking about that, that's whenever I started thinking about, okay, well, what does jump training do? What does sprint training do? Like sprint training. Well, if we go all the way back to the stuff that I hated in college and physiology about like contraction theory and about how the action potential hits the circle lemma, excuse me, and goes down, transfers, goes into the involution of the T tubule and starts pushing out calcium. Well, that's one way calcium starts getting pushed out, and the other way is a voltage gated. And that's a faster process, and we can speed that up through sprint training. Okay. And then the lactate dehydrogenases, like if we need, this is why if you train long, slow distance, you start to work one way. And if you do repeated sprints, you'll start to work at another. But LDH still increases for both because it's LDH 1 and 2 for the aerobic, LDH 4 and 5 more for the anaerobic. But, that's the stuff that I started thinking about. And then it hit me one day that the only difference between training for sport and training for general human performance is that for human performance, we use quality of life instead of a scoreboard as our marker of progress. So if we start to think about what's the low-hanging fruit for what it is that I need to develop, and we develop that, all of a sudden things get better. It's like the training with that I just mentioned with Joe Signorelli and the Parkinson's. Holy cow, you give somebody exhibiting bradykinesia faster training, and bradykinesia, that just means slow moving, right? So if we give the slow movers a velocity emphasis, they adapt by velocity. Holy cow, specific adaptations and impose demands is a thing? Oh my God, somebody should put this in a textbook. But so it's nothing earth-shattering, but it's just you don't think about it until you flip it on its head and put it sideways, and then it's like, oh, this makes perfect sense. We can make a lot better recommendations on training if we know what we're trying to get out of it.
And what would be some of those recommendations be for the Gen Pop people that just maybe they just don't have a massive training background? And it's just
Yeah,
I
dude.
feel like a lot of it's just like most people just get into the gym and it's like, okay, we have to do a couple machines here or like walk on the treadmill, and that's like all they know and all they know how to do, and they think that's the best thing for their health.
Yeah, so it's, we would need to do testing to know what they needed, right? Point blank. But some things just like simple sprinting or move, normal gait stuff. Sprinting that, it's like wow, and sled sprints and things like that. The improvement in balance and stability that these people with Parkinson's got from sprinting was mind-blowing. Massive improvements in the gait speed. I expected that. I did not expect stability and coordination and balance to improve as a result of the sprinting like we did. And it makes sense whenever you stop and think about it. What do you do in sprinting? Well, a lot of the time you're standing in single support. What do you have to be able to do there? Well, you got to balance. Okay, what else do we have? Well, our arms and legs are going in different patterns. That's coordination. Well, when's the last time some of these people did anything? And dude, people hear coordination training, and I next time I see somebody doing this, I'm going to slap them. They're like, "Oh, we need to do coordination training. Let's rub our belly and pat our head." No, no, it's whole body coordination with skillful force application. So sprinting, jumping in different patterns, yoga and going through different ranges of motion, Pilates, all these things have got their place. They've got some great things that they do. They're just not good for everything, right? Sprinting is great for speed. It is great for coordination. It is great for balance. But what if you have sarcopenia? Just muscle wasting. Well, you're probably not going to put on a tremendous amount of muscle mass that way. But we can do that through resistance training. And our sets, what is it, like 65 to 80%, 8 to 12 repetitions. That's going to be our sweet spot. And then you're going to be putting on the muscle mass. So it just comes back to what does the person need? And the only way to really know it is to do testing. And I'm hoping that with AI and some of the different devices that are out there now, some of the different wearables, that we're going to be able to take a IMU or something similar. Maybe it's even just a camera-based thing, and be able to do all the different testings to figure out what the weak link is on these individuals.
Well, it's kind of crazy because the first thing people cut out of their program is sprinting, jumping, and basically do like as you get older and you're starting to train for just health, the training program goes to like more constrained, less movements, less
Dude,
of the things that you're talking about.
I've been doing that my whole life, right? I started out in powerlifting, and so I quit doing it there. And now I'm like, well, you know what? If I just sprint and crawl and jump, I feel and move a heck of a lot better. I'm not feeling good from lifting heavy weights anymore. I'll tell you that.
That's awesome, dude. Tristan, you got any other questions before we close this out?
One thing that I did actually have one final question on, this is going back to some of your students. I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Gooden, and he was talking about the importance of practitioners being able to train and knowing some of these adaptations. And I was just wanted to get your take on that. I'm pretty sure I'm going to know it, but just want to hear another person's perspective on getting practitioners, especially these people who are a lot more academic and maybe have so much info, being able to train and experience that.
You know, I got to think of the best way to put it because I'm a redneck from backwoods Oklahoma. Like I said before, I'm a coach with a PhD. I'm not a professor. Uh, I think that a lot of times, you ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting?
Yeah.
And there was this scene whenever they're sitting, you remember, I think they were sitting by a river or a lake or something on a park bench. And Robin Williams has Matt Damon's character come and meet him. And he was like, you shook me, whenever you said this. And then I realized you're just a kid. You don't know anything. You don't know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never felt love. You've never done these things. And you ain't going to know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel to read it in a book. Let's get in the weight room. Let's go out and train. If you're not training, what are you doing? Right? And I even have to look at myself like that sometimes. And Bo gets on me sometimes too. I've had so many injuries, so many surgeries that, there's just a lot that I can't do anymore. Or do things, sometimes I'll get frustrated because I'll do something I think I should be able to do, and then it sets off, my hip from the last replacement. So then, I go downhill. But we've got to find what we can do and just try it. That way, you know what it feels like. So you know what the adaptation is what it's going to feel like for your athletes whenever they train. And you're going to know how to apply it, right? Is 12 sets of 2 the best thing to do because Louis said so, or is it going to be the best thing to do because from your training that 12 by 2 is the way to do it? Now, I was the opposite. Whatever Louis told me to do, I did. And that's why I've got bilateral hip replacements. Louis told me to squat wide, so I squatted wide. I didn't know that I had a bilateral femoral head defect and pistol grip deformity in both hips. They just ate everything up on the inside. And that's why every time I squatted wide, it hurt like hell. But Louis told me to squat wide, so I was doing it. So you've got to have a little bit of both of those. You got to have a little bit of the dog in you, and you got to have a little bit of the scientist in you. And if you don't have both, you could be really good with just one. But I don't think anybody's going to be great unless they have both.
Hell yeah. If you ain't training, what are you doing? We need to put
There
that
it
on a
is.
t-shirt for you. That needs to be
Yeah.
your apparel line right there.
You got to have a little bit of that dog in you.
Yeah, have a little bit of that dog in you. Coach, I appreciate the time. This was freaking
pleasure.
awesome. This is one of the best podcasts we've done in a while. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I've had fun.
Thank you guys for listening. Keep chopping wood.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week as we dive down another rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram at Austin Yoakum to stay updated on future podcast guests. Keep chopping wood.